Welcome to Clothing Culture. I'm Emily Lane.
I'm Bret Schnitker.
We speak with experts where we explore the global dynamics that shape trends in the fashion industry.
Brought to you by Stars Design Group, a global production and design house with over 30 years of industry experience.
Well, welcome back.
Thanks, Emily.
I'm so glad you're here again today, Bret.
I can't be anywhere else. It's COVID.
I have you trapped for another podcast.
You do, right.
Well, today we are going to talk about the fundamentals of starting a business in apparel and building a brand. This is something that almost every day we get phone calls and emails of people who have their sights set on starting their own brand. And I understand it sounds like a really sexy business to get into fashion and designing and seeing your clothes online and on store in a store. From your perspective, what would be the first thing you would tell somebody?
Run. No. I think it's super important, again, to really think about setting in a business plan, understanding kind of the long game in building a brand. Mm-hmm. You know, the theory of, I think we mentioned in another episode, I build it, they will come. It's rare in this industry. And so you mentioned a lot of people get really enamored by this business. Mm-hmm. And we're finding this massive trend of more and more people getting involved in the apparel business. And I think that part's exciting. They've got, opportunities to fill into niches or speak to, their talents within the industry. But it's something that's generally treacherous if you don't really think through it well. Sure.
So, obviously starting out with a business plan is kind of like this, that is a necessary first step. And I think we have some good resources that we can certainly share in our show notes. There's some great business plan builders and things like that.
Sure.
But in addition to really sitting down and thinking about your business plan, what are some other key pieces that you really need in place before you're ready to actually engage, a company to help with design or manufacturing?
Finance, obviously, is maybe an obvious one, but what's not so obvious is how much finance. Mm-hmm. Understanding that typical brands start to break even at year 5. There's an investment period. There's these positioning years that really last between years 1 and 3. You start, if you're doing everything right, you're out there and you've got this engagement with your target audience that, around years 4 or 5, you really start to turn that corner and, you have a good chance to be profitable after year 5. There are exceptions to that, but there's no substitute for time when it comes to building an audience today, and building a brand. And I think understanding the finances that are going to start you here and take you through to that end point are really important to understand. I can't emphasize that enough with our experience with a lot of very talented people who have started brands who simply ran out of money, and it's something that's important.
Understanding those numbers and, the finances side of things, that is actually far more complicated than I think people really initially understand. A lot of times we've had people say, okay, well, I'd like to just start with, 5 items or 2 items and, order 20 of them, 100 of them, get them online, sell them, and then we'll see how it goes. And then there it is, And in all practicality, that's not the way to build a business.
It can be. It just may not ultimately work for that particular brand. We have a lot of brands today that are focusing on the best T-shirt, other items like that. I think we've talked about that in the past. So, you can run a singular item business and potentially you can do really well. If you're building a brand specifically, I think that, understanding the assortment planning in a brand well. There are there are core key pieces. Usually 30 to 40% of your line would be core basics that don't have seasonality generally, that don't have this forced markdown period, that can help you bring consistent revenue in. If you really build those products right and you build a following, a lot of customers will come back over and over again for those basics. And so understanding that and having a good percentage in there limits your risk and extends the period of time that you can carry that inventory. But then you have fashion basics and fashion pieces. Fashion pieces generally, they're more limited buys. They're things that provide excitement, that focus maybe the visionary elements of your brand and draw the consumer to you. Those things, especially as new brands, those things become challenging because, you might have minimums that you need to purchase and you might not have the audience to sustain it. And you realize that those might have a seasonality or, you want to consistently refresh those fashion businesses. The markdowns and the liquidation of those items can be expensive, years 1 through 5 even, until you get the ability to flush through those items. The key is that fashion items should really come in and you should target them to always sell out after a period of time. And that again, depending on where you're at in that spectrum, can be easier or harder, and certainly more expensive. And then, the middle ground, which can be a combination between some basics and kind of fashion where they have an elongated period of time, but generally have some sort of seasonality. They give you 6 months or so, depending on that season, to be able to sell those. But understanding how that mix is made up year 1 versus maybe year 5 is a critical thing to digest and understand.
Okay, so you've talked about the assortment plan, but what about the supply chain behind it?
Yeah, again, varies dramatically from year 1 in most cases to year 5. When volumes are lower, traditionally our experience has been, if possible, brands find close to home manufacturing that can produce smaller minimums, that can react to items that are successfully and well received. And today that can be certainly challenging in the US because we don't have a ton of manufacturing and that manufacturing is expensive. But I have seen that as a consistent path for brands where they're bringing in their audience and they're attracting that audience. And then at one point, they make the decision to go offshore. When they go offshore, that whole combination that we talk about, certain styles that can last, year after year, core basics, or certain ones that can be 6 months, or certain ones that are fashion that last, perhaps a quarter or less. That supply chain becomes more complicated. You have minimums to deal with and you have lead times to deal with. We live, as I mentioned in previous things, in a micro society. Customers want things fast, but supply chains just as much as you would want them to, and especially as an emerging brand or a smaller brand, they just don't move as fast as you would really like them to. You don't garner a heck of a lot of attention when you're placing really small quantities in overseas factories. So planning effectively and understanding the weeks of supply on some of these things and knowing when to drop in those reorders to stay in business. Because frankly, garments in this case are the revenue maker and the profit maker. So when you run out of goods for extended periods of time, you've run out of revenue. And we've seen a lot of cases also where these brands don't understand that dynamic, and they've been out of product for a number of months, and it can really cripple a starting brand.
Yeah, I think that is a big misconception. Often in talking to startups, they think, oh, well, that's a wonderful scenario to be in. If I sell out, woohoo! Yeah. But, understanding the time it takes to get back into product, I think is a real thing that needs to be a part of that strategy when you're putting your plan together.
And part of the business plan.
Exactly.
If you understand it in the business plan, it helps you really start to think through all those challenges at the outset. And so many people, as you know, you've been in those meetings, I've gone from mentor to some of these groups to tormentor because I really push them so much on the numbers. And again, a lot of these people that start brands are visionaries and creators, and they don't want to be bogged down by the numbers, right?
Well, thinking about the numbers, we've talked a little bit about the investment from a product standpoint goes, but we all know to launch a company, a brand, you need more than product.
Yeah.
You need marketing infrastructure.
Yep. Absolutely. Plug for Emily right there. Yeah.
Well, it's so important.
I agree, especially today. I mean, when we're moving so much of our business and interacting with our consumer online, and there's so much noise online, there is this science behind marketing today.
Yeah.
And there is this goal. And again, that takes investment in dollars. And, one of the key things that startups don't really anticipate, I was 1 year ago, is the investment of time. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can spend 23 out of 24 hours a day trying to manage the business because you don't have the funds to really manage, have different people manage different aspects of that business. You feel like you're doing it all yourself. And sometimes things have to, some get pushed on the back burner and, some get moved up front based upon priority. But today, I think it's very important within that business plan to paint a very good understanding of the role that marketing does play in your success.
Talking about online, the consumer behavior has really evolved. And
continues to evolve.
Continues. And it's something that we have talked about a few times. But, we've really moved into a consumer-driven economy versus, these big powerhouse retailers and organizations really running with the trends and setting the pace for things. So what are some of those as a new brand, or what are some of the key challenges that you face going into this more consumer-driven market?
The ability to communicate and draw your consumer. I think this ability to have a point of view, we've talked about in the past, a lot of people that develop brands come from a design perspective, many of them, and they have this vision for this brand. And I think it's important today that you're sure that consumer or enough consumers, follow that vision that you have. Mm-hmm. And so, one of the biggest challenges when you're strapped for cash is how do you get out and test market this vision? How do you test market the consumer before you make big financial decisions? And some of the people that that we've mentored, it's been a lot of personal on a plane, into communities. Pre-COVID was pop-up shops.
Right.
Throwing, quote, get-togethers or parties or whatever to, interact with the consumer and hear what they're feeling about some of the prototypes or some of the initial products that you're bringing in, and being very, very sensitive to letting them know that they do have a voice, and if there's something particular that they're not super thrilled with or something that needs to evolve, taking that as an opportunity. I think big companies like Apple understand that that's always an opportunity. Apple iPhone 1 through, 12?
Right.
Every year we want a new one.
Evolve, right?
The new and improved model is something that these brands can always utilize as attention getters or bringing your consumer into that communication.
Right.
We've listened to our consumer, and we've evolved the product. Come try this. And I think those things in the past were never really done. And today it's a critical part of I think, the brand.
I agree. I like how much that is this combination of we hear you, and it's good marketing. And so it's kind of a win-win on all sides of things.
It's almost like the new position as a chief communications officer, where people are communicating with, where someone in the organization at some point as you evolve is constantly charged with communicating with the audience. Mm-hmm. And today we've got built-in things, the 1 to 5 star ratings, which immediately can make or break you, right? Mm-hmm. And they're going to tell you right away whether they like your brand or they don't. And so really thinking through those steps too are really important. You hear very quickly today.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you see any other shifts in the industry happening that would impact somebody who has their dream set on starting their own brand?
I think understanding today, as so many people are migrating online to make their online purchasing decisions, the vast assortment of choices that exist online today because of what we talked about with this kind of boutique brand economy where there's this kind of ability for so many people to have all their voice, and you're now vying for a percentage of that. Navigating those waters, I think, are really something that, to me, is a newer and more unique challenge today than it's ever been. And sometimes, as we've discussed in the past, do you kind of, with reverse psychology, know that, direct to mail pieces have all but dried up. And today you're seeing with some brands the decision to curate a really beautiful catalog that goes to a home or goes to a target audience where they might have time to page through a really nice catalog with great images and show your product. Certainly they'll go online to buy it.
Sure.
But it's a space where there's not that much noise now.
Yeah.
So really thinking strategically about how to reach out and communicate with your audience.
Some
today.
creative thinking
Absolutely,
is really
for sure.
important. So before we wrap up, are there any other kind of key bits of advice you would want to share?
I think today it's really important to align yourself with experience when you're going out and starting a brand. And understand that in many cases, an expense for launching a brand can be, when you're talking about inventory and even limited employees and, periods of time, you're investing as much as you would on a house, sometimes as much as a big house. Right. And so, a lot of people, if you put it in that context, they're going to make plans differently, and they're going to really vet this opportunity that exists out there that they think for them. And they should really vet that with, some skilled individuals that can ask tons of questions, that can really vet that opportunity and make sure that they're just not, so many times we've seen people that have just thrown a lot of money away and not survive. And the ideas, frankly, have been good.
Yeah.
Because they don't take the time to really think about the size of investment that occurs when you're building a brand. And there is no substitute for time when we are building brand equity.
Right.
It doesn't happen overnight. Brand equity comes with consistent integrity and trust in that brand. And it takes a while to build your followers and your club, that want to be part of that. And that time can be expensive.
What is your thought on local, national, global approach?
Interesting. I think that today we are in a globally driven economy, and it would be a mistake to not consider decisions when you're launching a brand to think globally. China by 2025 will be the largest consumer of luxury goods, I think, in the world. You have, in China, you have, I think 1.4 billion people. In India, you have 1.36 billion people. That's a big percentage of the people on this planet. And when you distill down the middle class and the consumer class within those nations, that's a pretty powerful group there. They will far surpass the U.S. in terms of consumerism in the next few years. So I think thinking globally is really important.
Well, thank you, Bret, once again, for sharing your valuable insight that came from how many years now in the industry? 30-some?
Okay. Rub it in.
Well, if you have any questions on this topic, please feel free to reach out. You can find us at Clothing Coulture or at Stars Design Group on Instagram. You can also find us on our website at www.starsdesigngroup.com. Make sure to subscribe so you can stay apprised of upcoming episodes of Clothing Coulture.